Men don't talk face to face. They talk shoulder to shoulder. Shoulder to shoulder. That's the official motto of the Australian Men's Shed Association, which now has more than 900 locations around the country and many more around the world. It's about making connections. And I'm not talking dowel joints or spot welding here.
This is Signs of the Times Radio with Kent Kingston.
Yes, you are with Signs of the Times Radio, and here in the studio with me is community broadcaster and men's shed aficionado, Brian Lankow. How are you, Brian?
I'm doing very well, and thank you for inviting me into your studio.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic that you could be here. Yeah, you've been involved in radio for a long time, so I don't need to talk to you about mic technique or anything. That's fantastic. In the Sydney area, just?
26 years out of Borkham Hills community radio station, and now coming out of the Gold Coast. The website is bethere.org.au if you want to listen.
Okay, well, there you go. And you have a particular focus there on supporting families who've struggled with abuse, a history of abuse in the family. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct. Mainly the music that goes 24 hours a day with my interjections is particularly tilted towards support, romantic interests, and the disappointment and all of those sorts of things. So we lift the people up more than putting them down.
Yeah, well, sure. So it's a bit of positive radio there. Oh, look, and we're totally into being positive here too. But what we really wanted to focus on today was your involvement with the Men's Shed movement. And it's interesting they call it a movement because it's not just an organisation. So tell us a little bit about your personal involvement with the Men's Shed movement. And I guess, what it is, like what it feels like when you actually walk in there.
Okay, now look, I started with a Men's Shed organisation many years ago. In fact, I was a working man at the time, and I have joined 3 in my course of life. The first one was very interesting insofar as it was only once a month, and the Men's Shed at that time that I joined was shared between 2 members' big sheds. They didn't in other words, the organisation didn't have a shed of their own. They used members' sheds, and that was very interesting. But
okay, when you say, so you're just talking about average blokes who had a pretty good shed set up at home.
Exactly.
They would invite a bunch of other guys to come around and hang out in their shed, and they could use their tools or bring some of their own. Okay.
So they alternated between the 2 sheds. As I was a working boy, and having very early starts, the work at night got a little bit involved, and so I quit that because of my working temperament more than the lack of interest in the Men's Shed.
Yeah, sure.
The second Men's Shed that I joined, which was fairly local to where I live, it turned out to be a show and tell, and I was intimidated by the absolute intricacy and the finish.
The professionalism by the sound of it.
I was a learner. I wanted to learn, in particular, wood-turning techniques.
Oh, yeah.
And these people really, really intimidated me. So I did it for about 3 weeks, and then I declined to continue.
Right. So I guess it's important if you're going to get involved in Men's Shed to find a Men's Shed where the interests of the guys there are, I guess, compatible with yours, and where the level of expertise is also compatible with yours.
Yes, and if they're willing to teach a newbie along the lines that the new person really wants to go to. Now, I would suggest to anyone who is looking for a shed to shop around for one that suits them in the area that they live. The third one, which I am currently belonging to, and I have been a member now for nearly 2 years, is fantastic. It really is. It's open during the day for a Thursday, and it's open on a Saturday. I go to the Thursday one, and there would be approximately 15 to 20 people on a Thursday.
Okay. So we've got an article about the men's shed movement in this month's Signs of the Times magazine by Suvi Mahonen. And she sort of gives the impression there that most of the men who are involved in the men's shed movement are retired guys. Is that your experience?
Well, that certainly is the case now with the one that I belong to, because it's held during the day.
Yeah.
Now, the ones at night had a different aspect because the majority of them had day jobs anyway.
Right.
And it was only the personal involvement with me having a job that started very early in the morning that precluded me from continuing.
Right, yeah, because I have to admit, I've been interested myself in the men's shed movement when I first bought a motorbike a couple of years ago. And I like older kind of bikes. And basically, if you're going to own an old motorcycle, you then need to learn to be a mechanic. unless you've got a lot of money. So I started looking around, well, is there a men's shed around here that maybe I could go to in the evenings after work, and maybe some old fellow with some expertise in mechanics could give me some tips. But it did turn out that the opening hours were pretty much during the day, which did preclude someone who was in full-time work. So that was a bit disappointing for me, but luckily I've since found other guys who are interested in motorbikes. And there's something sort of special, isn't there, about like guys getting together, working on a project together, sharing expertise and tips, and yeah, it's a great way to connect.
It's interesting for me because I come out of the building trade, and for all of my working life, I was working with timber and then went into management, but still dealing with the use and the techniques of timber work.
Yeah.
So when I joined the last organisation, I had a whole heap of projects that I wanted to do, and there is always someone in the Men's Shed Association that is revolving around, and they do their own thing and you're doing your thing, and they are always willing to give you advice, whether you are wanting it or whether you're not. Now, the Men's Shed, as I said, that I go to has about 15 to 20 odd attendees. It fluctuates, of course. Of those 15 to 20, I would say 50% of the attendees would have personal projects that either they were doing for themselves or some people were helping them. And sometimes they helped me, sometimes I helped them. The balance of people who were there had no project whatsoever. They weren't interested in doing anything, and they sat around the table, cups of coffee, cakes on the table, and they just wanted to chat. And that has a very distinct and obvious purpose because they were in the company of men.
Yeah, yeah. And this is the thing, I mean, in Suvi's article, she says that it can be really hard for guys if you've worked full-time for a long time. Most of your social connections are with other people at work, and you actually don't have a lot of friends outside of work. So when you get to the end of your working life, you get the proverbial gold watch, and you go home, and there you are with the missus just eyeballing each other sort of 24/7. The wheels can start to fall off. Blokes suddenly realise, I actually don't have a lot of connections. I'm actually lonely here. And like depression, anxiety, and that's a time when like marriages can break up and stuff like that. So I guess these men's sheds, like you say, it's not simply about fixing, learning to wood turn or fixing, someone's motorcycle. There's some real social and emotional needs that are being fulfilled by that organisation.
That's interesting because these men who talk about current events, they talk about things that they have done, they listen to other people. There's no emphasis. I have never heard any of them in the 2 years that I've been at this men's shed where the men actually do talk to one another. There has been no inclination that I have heard about these things that you just mentioned, depression, arguments with the wife, the fact that they're having problems with their grandchildren. All of those so-called mental things never seem to come up. It is mainly talking about current events, sporting fixtures, things that they have done, visitation, overseas visits, wherever they have gone. But nevertheless, it's serving a purpose because they are out in the open, out of the trouble zone, if I can put it along those lines.
Yeah.
And they are enjoying men's company.
Well, what's special about that? I mean, obviously, a man and his wife could have been married for 30, 40 years, and they're the best friend that a guy has in the world. So why this need, do you think, for men to connect with other men in an environment like the men's shed?
I can't answer that because it's never occurred to me. I enjoy my wife's company.
Well, and that's what I'm saying. Most guys do, but nevertheless, there's still this need.
My need was to have a project. And so I developed around my need department a set of goalposts that I wanted to kick the ball through. So, look, it is of interest that these men get together, and I have heard stories, apocryphal maybe, about people who have retired and they've got no interest in life. They sit around home and death comes very quickly.
Scary, isn't it? Yeah.
And most of the men that are in the men's shed that I belong to are in the zone, myself included. So there's a little bit of a worry. We have a few deaths in that 2 years where people just don't appear anymore, and we find they have passed away and no one's told us about it, or they are very good members and we know a little bit about them and we go along as a group of men in our men's shed shirts and we represent the men's shed at their funeral.
Wow.
And that is a little bit of a comfort for us, but it's more of a comfort for the bereaving families.
Yeah. So what it seems that you're saying is that for a lot of men, the men's shed, those projects they're involved in, those guys they're connected with, the appointments that they have, Thursday, Saturday, or whenever it is, gives them a sense of purpose in their life, a sense of direction.
Well, it sets up a program of attainment. They have other attainments that we hear nothing of. And they just work through a calendar, if you like, a weekly calendar. Yeah. And it's like a person that goes out and plays golf every Tuesday. They've got an aiming point. Yeah. And they know that on that particular day, they don't come to the men's shed, they just pick up their golf clubs. Yeah. Those sorts of things. Sure. And it serves the same sort of purpose.
I actually lived until quite recently next door to a guy who's involved with the men's shed in Wangi on Lake Macquarie. That's based at I think a Uniting Church sort of hosts it. Is that fairly common for churches to?
It is absolutely common, and I haven't told you, but the men's shed that I belong to is an adjunct to the Glenwood Baptist Church.
Oh, okay, there you go.
And I rather enjoy the theological debates that we have around the lunchtime table, of which I sit down and have
so there are a few of the Baptist guys from that local church involved, are there?
Yes, and it is part of their structure of the men's shed that only members of the Baptist Church are committee members.
Oh, right, okay.
And they do that for a specific reason, and that is that if the majority of committee members were outside of their particular brief, then they could be voted, something could be voted in that they didn't want. So right. I'm fully conversant with that sort of aspect of life.
Yeah, because the men's shed or like association, the broader umbrella body, is not a Christian organisation. In fact, I imagine they're pretty strictly non-sectarian.
In fact, I have in front of me a few things from the Men's Shed Association, and one of the things is the AMSA will not admit to membership of any organisation which is aimed primarily at promoting a particular religious view or practice.
Okay, so there you go. So they're saying a men's shed is not, if you're going to be under that official umbrella body, a men's shed is not there to
promote their religion.
Yeah, it's not there to convert people to the religion of the church that's hosting the. Look, I mean, I think that's fair enough in some ways. I mean, there are guys in the community that have this need. They don't necessarily want to learn more about religion, but they do have this social need to connect with other people. And I guess this is why we call it a men's shed movement, because there are men's sheds that are not associated with that Australian Men's Shed Association, but there are some that are. So
now, that doesn't preclude us from talking about theology.
Oh, of course not.
In the past few months that have gone by, there's been a spectacular sportsman that has been sort of discriminated against, if I can use that.
Israel Folau.
Israel Folau. And so we talk about the freedom of speech. Was the organisation that it was employing him has the right to do this? Has he got the right to say what he believes?
Yeah.
And so
it's a hot topic, isn't it? So many different angles.
All of these subjects, and that is only one, that come into the discussion around the lunchtime program, of which I sit down and have a cup of tea with them. And you get the fors and you get the againsts, but the amazing thing is I can sit next door to a man who is vehemently against everything that I say, and I, vice versa, against the things that he says. But at the conclusion of lunch, when we wash the dishes, we can say, okay, buddy, do you need a hand with your project? And we can work alongside of each other with no discrimination whatsoever.
That's fantastic.
And that's the whole thing about the men's shed. Now, the men that come there are not all fit and able.
Yeah.
We have carers that bring severely disabled men into the men's shed.
Wow.
And that caused a little bit of concern when they first came, because in a men's shed there are fairly dangerous machinery, and a person could get hurt very, very easily. It has never failed. These guys who cannot talk, they are completely disabled as far as their mobility and as far as their speech are concerned, but they are looked after so lovingly by their carers. And
they have the opportunity of social connection and interaction with the other guys who are there.
Yes, and we greet them and put our arms around these disabled men, and we congratulate the carers for the absolute brilliance that they portray in bringing these guys into our shed.
No, that's fantastic. I was about to say the guy who I used to live next door to, Peter, who's involved in the Wanji men's shed, told me that often another organisation will come to their men's shed and say, hey, listen, we're a, local sailing club or whatever, and we've got a small wooden boat that's sort of in need of a bit of a patch-up.
Yes.
Can you give us a hand? And they'd know that if they got a professional, boat builder to do it, it would cost much more than the boat is worth and much more money than they have. And so their men's shed in particular does a lot of sort of voluntary community sort of projects to help other organisations and other people around the place. Is that something common among men's sheds, to your knowledge?
Yes, it is. This particular organisation that runs the shed out of their properties have a personal theological program that they spend a lot of money into. It's looking after families of refugees in the Blacktown area.
Right.
So, okay, Brian comes along there and he's got full of these ideas, and I make toys and things for my grandchildren. They said, oh, you do all of that for your grandchildren? Can we help? And I said, well, my grandchildren don't need any more stuff, thank you all the same. Oh, no, we didn't mean that.
Yeah.
Could you help us build all of these toys for these deserving families?
So wooden toys?
Wooden toys. We made 46 trucks because the group banded together, and every month we spent one day flat out doing these things, and we presented them to these refugee families. We've also built dolls' toys, cradles for dolls, push prams for the girls. So, yeah, look, there is projects that the organisation with whom we're connected does as an outreach program, and we support them. So it's a two-way street.
Yeah, so it's not just about blokes doing their own projects, it's also about seeing what need there is in the community.
Exactly.
No, that sounds absolutely fantastic. Are you aware at all? Have you looked into the history of the men's shed movement at all? Like where it started, who it started?
Well, I think it came out of the medical division of Australia, and I see in some of the stuff that I've got here that I'll leave with you. I think it started in 2007, and the idea that and this is apocryphal because I really haven't put my finger on it, it was recognised through medical intuition that women didn't come down with the same emotional things that men do. The women seem to be more open and more vocal and the more able to speak with their girlfriends.
More socially connected.
About things, not necessarily the specifics, but certainly the implications. And they can get advice from their girlfriends over a cup of coffee in a coffee bar.
Yeah.
Men seem to be isolationists. And the Men's Shed organisation, as I understand it, started in 2007.
In Australia, and is it an Australian initiative?
It's worldwide now.
It's worldwide now. It's spread, hasn't it? New Zealand, US, all over the place.
All over the women's prime minister that came, Julia Gillard, her partner was the government sponsor and spokesman for the Men's Shed Association.
Tim, I can't remember his surname, but Tim.
The first bloke.
The first bloke, yeah.
He was the governmental connection with the Men's Shed Association. Whether he's still involved with that, probably not.
Yeah,
now
but he was a patron for a while.
He was the patron. That's the word I'm looking for.
Okay.
And so it grew because of a perceived need.
Well, I mean, obviously it's more than a perceived need because, I mean, you look at the number of them, those men's sheds that are around these days. I mean, they're all over the place. There's hundreds of them.
But they're
probably
all
thousands.
But they're all different.
Yeah.
They all cater for a different position in society.
Yeah.
And as I have previously mentioned, I have tried 3. 2 didn't suit me because of my own personal circumstances. But the third one just clicked with me. And to be fair, I have given this a fair bit of thought. My theological belief is very, very similar to the theological belief of the church that runs the Men's Shed that I'm a member of.
Yeah, so there's a connection there.
There is
a faith connection,
Yes, a faith connection.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, the men's sheds aren't McDonald's, you know. It's not a franchise where you can expect to get exactly the same, you know, McChicken burger in every outlet. I mean, each men's shed, being a movement, is going to reflect their interests and the personalities of its members, and that's sort of the way it should be in some ways, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, there's that diversity.
Now, there's one guy who comes to the men's shed, and he has a lot of trouble walking. He's mentally alert, but he's physically a mess because of other things.
Yeah.
And so he wants to be involved in a project. Thursday just gone, as by way of example, I'm making a rocking horse. I've made 5 of them now, and I'll show you a picture of them later. He wanted to do something, but he had nothing. So I was cutting out the profiles for this rocking horse and giving him all of these bits and pieces, hundreds of pieces. And he sat there all day in a seat with a piece of sandpaper in one hand and a piece of timber in another, and he was just sanding. And at the end of the day, he had a big grin because he knew that he was helping me.
Yeah, he'd made it. I mean, heck, who likes sanding? It's the worst job. I spent yesterday sanding my deck, so even with a machine, it gets old pretty quick.
So look, there are people who are willing but not experienced.
Yeah.
And so we give them simple jobs. Eventually, they will make a tea tray so that they can sit in bed and have a cup of coffee and a cake without spilling things onto the bed sheets. Those sort of simple little projects.
Yeah. Now, Brian, men's sheds aren't all, you know, beer and Skittles and, you know, men working shoulder to shoulder as the official, you know, AMSA motto is. You know, men don't work face to face, they work shoulder to shoulder. There's also the very hot button issue of women. There are some women who say they want to, well, some women are coming along to men's sheds. Is this the end of the world as we know it, or is this something that men's sheds can deal with? What do you say?
I have a very strong opinion.
Okay, go on.
Which is not shared by everybody.
Okay, that's fine. Whatever. I don't even know what your opinion is yet. But whatever it is, I'll play devil's advocate for you.
And it's not shared by women, strangely enough.
Okay.
I support women coming into a shed. And there are a number of reasons why. The first thing comes from a trade background. I'm a tradie.
Yep.
There is a trade shortage in Australia.
Yeah.
And so women who have been standing on the sidelines are now going into the building trade. Now, in the course of time, those women are going to be retiring. And they will have all of the necessary skills. So my belief is eventually they will make ingresses into the men's shed.
But I mean, there are already women there. I mean, some guys like bring their wives along, and the missus brings along some scones, and it's like, well, if you bring along the scones, you're very welcome anytime, and it's all fine. And there are women who do enjoy learning practical skills, and they get along in that environment really, really well. Some men's sheds are very against it. Some men's sheds are like, hey, it's fine.
The other thing I've mentioned, the trade shortage.
Yeah.
The other thing is that when you get a group of men who are used to rough sort of language, and I've heard every word in the sun, let me tell you, and it doesn't frighten me and it doesn't annoy me because I've lived with that. I don't use those words myself.
Yep.
The women coming in, they can be as bold as a man.
Oh, yeah.
As far as that's concerned, but they do tend to subdue that sort of attitudinal approach to life.
Yeah.
So that could be a plus.
So the blokes sort of settle down a bit and watch their language a little bit more when women are around.
I think so.
And for you, that's a positive. Some guys might see that as a negative. They might say, you know what, I can't be myself when there's a woman around. I feel like I have to watch my P's and Q's.
Now, first one that I belong to, the one that was held once a month in alternating men's private sheds.
Yeah.
When I first turned up the first night, there was a woman there. And I asked very quietly, what's the woman doing here? And the explanation was quite justifiable.
Yep.
The rationale behind the whole thing was that her husband, who was now deceased, was a member of the men's shed.
Right.
She was obviously grieving, and someone out of sympathy or
kindness,
understanding said, hey, look, I don't know her name, let's call her Doris.
Yeah.
Hey, Doris, come along to the men's shed one night and meet the men that your husband was friendly with. So she came along and she stayed and she stayed and she stayed. And I joined and then left at a subsequent time.
And Doris was still there.
And Doris was still there.
Right.
Now, I have had an opportunity of talking with the convener of that men's shed many years later, and he said that the whole thing blew to bits.
Yeah.
And I asked why. And apparently Doris had a female friend, and she said, why don't you come to the men's shed? So along comes the friend of Doris.
Right.
And one owner of the one shed said, if women are coming to the men's shed, you're not going to be using my shed. The owner of the other shed said, oh, that's a bit of a blow. My wife was thinking of joining. So the convener said, that's it, closing down.
There you go. So I guess, I can understand from a certain point of view that there are guys who say, you know what, we need a safe place where men can be men, talk about men's issues. As you say, you haven't heard a lot of opening up about personal stuff, but I understand it does happen in some places.
Exactly.
There does need to be a safe place for men to, enjoy the company of other men, and some people think men's sheds are that. I don't have a problem with that if that's what that particular men's shed thinks, but I don't have a problem either with, these situations just sort of evolve, don't they? Like the situation with Doris that you mentioned. And to me, it's a beautiful thing, and I just think we need to be open to it. Really, in the end, that's my honest opinion. I don't really care either way. I think it's up to each individual men's shed to see what works for them.
Well, the suffragette movement started with a lot of opposition, and now it's accepted.
That's right.
Now the glass ceiling is being shattered as far as business executives are concerned, and politics and prime ministerships and all of that sort of thing. So yes, look, I think that eventually it will be a change. So my personal opinion, as previously said, I'm in favour of it.
Yeah, well, there you go. Hey, well, thanks so much, Brian. I really appreciate you sharing some of your insights from your personal experiences with men's sheds. And I know our readers would, if they're interested, would get a lot more information and perspectives about the men's sheds movement from the article that's in this month's Signs of the Times magazine, A Shed Full of Men, it's called. So, yeah, you can obviously Google men's sheds, look up the Australian Men's Shed Association, see if there's one in your area. And as Brian says, just sort of, shop around, see what's going on. Thanks so much for your time, Brian. Really appreciate it.
Pleasure, and thank you very much for inviting me in. I've enjoyed it. I like being in front of a microphone.
Excellent.
Today's episode was based on an article appearing in this month's Science of the Times magazine. A subscription is just $26 for 11 issues a year. To find out more, visit scienceofthettimes.org.au. Signs of the Times has been published in Australia since 1886 and is proudly produced by Adventist Media.
This is an Adventist Media podcast.